feel like I'm on Johnny Carson. I should have come out through those curtains instead of out from the wings. So, good morning. Now, Virginia is enough South that you all can speak back, not be embarrassed. You know, in the South, when you speak at I always start by speaking to people and saying good morning. So, thank you, Judy, and thank you, Sherry, and everyone else who was involved in bringing me here. I'm very, very happy to be here today. I come here with lots of memories, and some of those are just filled with nostalgia and good nostalgia, and some of those are filled with not too much pride. I spent over 20 years ago. I spent 3 years in Virginia teaching at Mary Washington College. Speaking of when one was a pup, I was very much a pup, and that was a time when I was very engrossed in my own beginnings of personal change. One of the things I was teaching, it was 19th century American literature, and I was teaching those novels that actually talked about that first feminist movement. And that was my first understanding, or beginning to understand that, was in 1964, 65, 66, 67. I had a friend there at the time who was going around campus talking about the Betty Friedan's feminine mystique, and I was real taken with that, and I was going, whoa, what is all of this? But I was so taken with struggling with my own personal changes and my struggle with the onset of adulthood that I managed to miss full participation in the greatest social change movement in the 20th century. The civil rights movement was going on. That was the heart of it at that time. I was on the periphery of it. But I managed to be preoccupied mostly with my teaching, my own personal growth, and miss that really full participation. And I have such regrets about that is staggering to me. So one of the things I want to do today is talk about how much I hope that 20 years from now there's not anyone in this room who has any regrets about missing this great social change movement that we're currently in. And I want to speak to that, if I may, about checking it out to make sure that everybody is part of it, knows that you're part of it, and figures out, if you're not, exactly how you can participate in it. I don't want you to have regrets. I want you to come out of here 5 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, saying, I was in the heart of it. Not only was I in the heart of it then, but I'm still in the heart of making social change. Because if there's anything that I've learned from my lifetime of living in the South and working with civil rights workers, which I still have the opportunity to do, is that you don't do this thing for the moment. You do it for the long haul. There's no, we're going to make social change and we're going to be out of here. You know, we're going to walk out the door. So many of the women I work with are in their 70s and 80s in the Delta of Arkansas. And they say, I've been at this since 1940. I've been at this since 1935. I've been at this since 1950. And it's going to go through the rest of my life. So that's the kind of social change that I want to talk about. So the major social change movement that we're part of right now is the battered women's movement. And I think that it is the strongest movement that's happening in this country. There are many, many other movements happening. That when you talk about women's movement, I think this is it. That the women's movement finds this at its core, at its absolutely core of that movement. And it's extraordinary. This is a movement that has touched the lives of hundreds of thousands of people already, continues to touch their lives every day. And it's extraordinary, and it's wonderful, but it's about change. Now, I want to make it clear that that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about a social change movement. I'm going to talk about the battered women's movement. I'm not going to talk about, well, I am in a way, but I'm not going to focus on those who are just in the field of working with battered women. Okay? There's a difference. There's some people out there that simply do this as their work. It's the way they go to get their salaries, and they're professionals in that field, and they don't consider themselves being about social change. I would hope that there's no one like that in this room. There may be, and if I want to talk with you before the day's over. I'm leaving at 2:30, so you're going to have to get with me fast. They just feel that this is not the thing for them. They're not necessarily concerned about social change. That is, when I talk about social change, now I'm talking about changing society until there's no violence against women and children. Okay? You call yourself Virginians Against Domestic Violence. You know, what you're talking about there, I assume, with that name, is you're talking about ending it. You're talking about saying no to it. You're talking about stopping it. Okay? Those who are not saying no to it, those who are not about changing it, may be holding back the movement. That's what we have to be careful about. We don't want to be in complicity with violence. We want to be working against it. So what I want to do for just a few minutes is just trace a little bit of history. This is a great month of May, and you always get to think about mothers and foremothers during this month. And so I want to talk just for a second about foremothers, to trace how this became a social change movement. Because it didn't happen with like 25 women who had held a feminist summit at one point and said, say girls, let's have a social change movement. It happened in a very gradual kind of way from women who had been battered, and women who bit by bit learned a politic of social change, and put it together over the years. It's been happening. You know, we're about to do the NCADV National Conference in Seattle in July, and it's going to be the 10th anniversary of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Wonderful anniversary, wonderful organization, but that was not the movement. That's only a piece of the movement. This movement's been going on for almost 20 years. Okay? 10 years is that organizational piece, you know. And that's different. It's grand and it's wonderful and it's different. So what we're trying to do at the National Conference is figuring out how to celebrate NCADV's 10 years at the same time celebrating the longevity of this movement. So what I want to talk about are 5 steps for how the social change movement came to be. The first was those first women who were battered women, okay? Battered women, never forget that, who took other women into their homes. Battered women who said, I know how terrible this is. I have found safety in my home. I'm going to take someone else in. And they opened their homes up here and in England to other women. So that was where it started. These were women who didn't think about themselves as being radical, you know? They didn't think about themselves as being extraordinary. They didn't think about themselves as movement builders. They didn't think about themselves as people who are eventually going to come to build a movement that would be international in its scope. They didn't think about themselves as people who were outrageous or peculiar or different or anything else. That's what's so interesting, I think, in retrospect, that they were ordinary women taking an extraordinary risk, you know, and they made this happen. Just a few women beginning it all. So the 5 steps. The first thing they did was the terribly, terribly brave thing, which is that they broke the silence. And these are the steps that we still follow. That first step of going out there and doing that risky thing of saying, I am a battered woman, you know, or I was a battered woman. That thing we have to say, or else other people don't even know to come, okay? That one risky thing. I don't know if you all remember those first speak outs or not, in your community or anywhere. Those first speak outs about battering, those first speak outs about rape, those first speak outs about incest, how liberating that was to hear for the first time that someone told your secret and there was more than you, that you were not the only person. I think it was extraordinary. It was for me. The first time I ever heard that. And when I think back now, I think I was awfully naive. This was in Fayetteville, Arkansas in 1978. 77, I guess, actually, was the year that a wonderful woman named Frances Woods had been to Rutgers, where she was getting her PhD. I guess she was doing an internship or something for her PhD in psychology. And she had done that on battered women. Well, she came back to Fayetteville, where we had a feminist community. I was working with Head Start kids at the time. And she said, we need to develop a battered women's shelter here. And she had called about 15 of us together, 15 feminists who were, you know, pretty involved in the community, women of all kinds. And we just looked at her. We said, do what? And, you know, I was incredibly naive. I said, battered women. You know, it's like, this was out of space talk as far as I was concerned. When we held our first meeting after that, where I think the first one had about 10 in it, we pulled it up to about 16 or 17 in that next meeting. There were two women there, one who just changed my life forever, who put me on this road. One was a woman of color. She said, she's a wonderful, wonderful singer. And I had followed her around just like a groupie to hear her sing for a long time and just admired her so much. And she stood up and she said, I'm a battered woman. And I just went, whoa. You know, it's like, sure, you know, she can't be. She's too great. She's too wonderful. She's too whatever. She pulled her skirt up and there was the imprint of an iron on her leg. And it just set me cold in my tracks. And the next woman, this was a woman also who worked with me in this big agency that we were involved in there. The next woman said, I want to speak to that. This was in a room with 15 or 16 people. And she said, I was a battered woman in California, and I was battered for 15 years. And she said, I saved my leftover money that I got to buy groceries each week until my kids were grown. And then I drove a car to the river. And I made every effort I could to let people know that I had drowned in that river. And I'm here under a different name. And that's the only way that I feel safe. Extraordinary risk. Broke that silence. And that silence has been broken every day since then in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and everywhere else throughout this country, around the world. Extraordinary kind of risk to say that truth for the first time. Okay? That's the first one. Okay? Breaking the silence. Second one, providing safety. Creating those homes, those early homes, early 70s, where women could come and be safe. For many people feel this is the most important thing that we do, is just provide that place for safety. Because if every woman had a safe, familiar, nurturing place to go, violence would be on its way to be ended, because every woman would be able to walk out. Now, there are other factors that we would have to put in there, but safety is a major one. The third one was that issue of ending isolation. Not only was silence broken, not only was safety provided, but women came to know that they were not the only one, that there was others out there other than themselves, okay? That one of the real necessary pieces of oppressions, particularly the various oppressions that affect women, like incest and battering and rape, the oppression of homophobia, they all require isolation. They require that you think that there's something unique about you and your situation, you know, and there's a kind of a surrounding thing about you to make you think that you can't break out of this, you know. There's something about you and your situation, and there are not other people out there who are like you. As long as we can keep people isolated, we can very successfully control them. It's a critical, critical piece. It's a deliberate piece. And it's one of the reasons that there's a lot of difference, too, in our services about battered women that happen in rural areas and those that happen in urban areas, because the isolation is so much even greater in rural areas. So that was the next thing. The fourth thing was the providing group work, okay? So you've got breaking the silence, safety, ending the isolation, and providing that group experience. And this was vital. This was women sitting around tables, drinking coffee. This is women sitting in living rooms of safe homes, these safe homes that women provided, telling their stories. And I don't know how much I can emphasize the importance of telling one's story. In whatever movement, whatever change thing that you're involved in, this is the crucial liberating piece, is telling one's story. It's liberating personally, and it's liberating in terms of the group. And the reason it's liberating is because it provides that commonality of experience. And it leads us to what I think is a crucial piece in terms of oppressions, which is that it leads us to stop blaming ourselves. Okay? It's when we learn that my story is her story, is her story, is her story, is her story, that they all have these common elements. They all have those little pieces that we begin to hear them, we think, my gosh, it sounds the same, you know? There becomes that connection between us, that connection among us. But there also comes a recognition that there's something greater going on out there. Most battered women over the last 20 years have walked into safety feeling like they have done something wrong. Okay? It's so important. If you're going to oppress somebody, you better make sure you also get some internalized oppression in there. Okay? If you're going to make racism effective, make sure that you get people of color to think they are doing something wrong and are deserving this racism in some way. If you're going to make battering effective, if you're going to make incest effective, make sure that that victim of that, the person who's being abused, thinks somehow that she has done something wrong, that she has brought it on herself because of some failure in herself. So the group work has been a vital, vital piece to get people to that point to understand they indeed are not to blame. Now, to get institutions to stop blaming has been a whole other piece, okay? So the fourth thing then has been the coming together to the fifth thing. Sorry, can't count, it's hard. Fifth thing has been, once women made those connections, once women realized it wasn't me, it was something else out here, and it wasn't just specific maybe just to this male, but was specific to some other kind of larger thing that was going on out there. In other words, they did analysis. They drew conclusions. And I say this in past tense, this is still happening every day, where people still continue to do group work, drew conclusions out of that to say, what then we have to do is change that larger thing that's going on out there. And that led to the fifth piece, which was to come together, to work together, to bond together, to make those changes. And those changes were about realizing that all kinds of things in society were going to have to be changed before violence would be changed. This is why this is a social change movement. I almost hesitate to give this speech. It's so simplistic, and yet there are people who go, social change, oh my God, I couldn't do that, that's horrible. But why, and this is why the women became radical, okay? It's because they came to understand that if you were going to stop battering, you had to touch on all of those things. The biggest thing we had to change was economics, and this is where we're still failing the most. This is the one that scares us to death. Because if you go for changing economic condition of women, you really are going to change sexism, but you really are going to be red-baited. You're going to be called a communist before you can think twice, okay? But we get to economics and we get the heart of the issue. How many women have come to your program and said, I stayed because I didn't think I could survive if I left? How many went back because they said, I don't think I can survive out there. I can't support me and my children. I have no skills. There are not jobs there. I can't live on a minimum wage job with 3 children. With that economic kind of grip, we realized we had to go for that. What does radical mean? Radical means going to the root cause of the problem, not dealing with the symptoms of the problem. The symptom of the problem is the violence. The root cause of the problem is a bunch of other things, where the power and the control really are taking place. And one of the major pieces of control in every woman's life is economic control. Huge, huge piece. Why women stay in marriages, sometimes when they're miserable in those marriages and there's no violence in the marriage. Why many times women get married in the first place. All kinds of decisions that we make because of those economic decisions. What happened to women, though, when they did this? They said, we've got to change economics. We've got to change housing. When you got a woman who comes through a battered women's program and she stays a week, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and she goes out, where can she live? Given that, here again, it's tied to economics. We've got to change child care. We've got to change housing, not only housing, transportation. It became issue after issue after issue. We realized that we were going to have to make change on every front, or violence would never end. It was just that simple. It's just almost too simple. But it's also extremely hard. What radicalized those women? It was that when they went to the institutions, they said, okay, we got to go and change these institutions. Housing is an institution in this country. You know, public housing, also private housing is institutionalized because it's connected to banks. You know, public health is institutionalized, education is institutionalized. We've got to change all those things. So what happened? I think these women were like me, they were naive. They said, we have figured this out. We have suddenly realized out there that men have power and control over women, okay? That they're controlling our lives and they're killing women. We have suddenly broken the silence, and now we're recognizing that hundreds of thousands of women are being battered and abused and killed and raped and tortured. And, I mean, the 70s, up until this day, it's just been staggering to come into fuller and fuller recognition of how extreme this violence has been. And we thought that all we had to do is go tell these people, like the preachers, the bankers, the principals of the schools, the doctors, the lawyers, did you know what we've learned? That all these people are having this terrible violence in their lives, and we thought they would look at us and say, oh my God, I didn't know that. And they would immediately get together to change it. Every Kiwanis club would be working on this issue. Every Lions Club. When we came to speak, they wouldn't tell a joke about beating women as they introduced us. How many times have you had that one happen? You know? That they would be on fire. When they did pancake breakfasts, it would be for us. Instead of women out there making speeches, we thought the good men. We knew there were some good men out there, and we thought they were going to take this thing on. All we had to do was deliver the truth. Well, I don't know if I need to talk any more about that, but I will just say a couple of words. When people met those barriers, that anger, that ridicule, that condescension, when they discovered they had a society that not only ignores abuse, that it supports the abuse of women, it radicalized women. It's made women say, we've got to work harder. We've got to get closer to the root of this abuse. Because for every battered woman, you have a woman who says, it's not just enough to end my violence. We've got to end violence in general. We've got to make that change that ends it for all women. So that's the story. Only 5 steps. Okay? So why then, with 4 mothers like that, do we have a battered women's movement that's half movement and half a group of people? Not half, I don't think. Well, I don't know. I don't know how to count those numbers. We have some people who are doing movement work, which is social change work, and you have some people who do only service delivery, and who say, I want no part of that. Why in the world do we have that? And I want to talk just for a second about why people have resisted that, and for us to think about it some. Why that resistance to change? Why that actually being complicit and going along with violence? I think we really have to consider this, because women are dying. And it always just comes back to that. And if they're not dying in a literal sense and being buried, they're dying day by day in their lives, in their living lives. We see it every day. Every woman here, every man here works with battered women. We see it every day, that dying off. And I sometimes wonder which is worse, the immediate death or those 20-year deaths, when it's every day of snubbing out your spirit. So, and this is a little bit hard to talk about because people get all upset and say, oh, you're being so judgmental, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. So, one of the things that happened in like 1977, 78, when we were working on the Battered Women's Program in Fayetteville, and it's true around the country, people who were professional wouldn't touch us. You couldn't get a social worker to take a full-time job in a Battered Women's Program for love nor money. I just said, are you serious? Oh, ragtag people like y'all, you don't know what you're doing. You're over there doing that thing that's pretty risky in the first place. You haven't even had your coursework. And we're going in something that's going to make us some money. And they did. And everybody said more. We're talking about women here, mostly. And therapists wouldn't touch us. They said, if you got some clients you can pay for, you send them over here. And we said, okay. If we get some money, we will. Well, you know, a long time for it. And yeah, we went without regular paid staff at the Fayetteville shelter for years. You know, the board committed 10 to 20 hours a week of full-time of work to that project. So what happened is that there came some sort of crunch, some sort of crisis in the influx of social workers and therapists around 1981 or 82, and all of a sudden you stand in the shelter and knock, knock, hear somebody saying, well, I have MSW from the University of Arkansas, and I saw your ad for, you know, whatever, an advocate, and here they were applying for jobs with us. And it made some real change, that influx of social workers and therapists. And I know there are social workers in this room, people with social work degrees, and I know there are people in here who are therapists. And I want to be perfectly clear. Is the camera on? Okay. All right. The problem is not whether you have a degree in social work or whether you're a therapist. Is everybody clear? I may have to get you to repeat that back, because this kind of thing always gets screwed up. They say, well, she came in there and attacked social workers and therapists. Okay. This is no attack on the institution, if it's an institution of social work or therapy. The problem is the changes that came about with that. The way some of the most radical social change people in this movement have degrees in social work. Okay? Some of the people that I honor from day one, Susan Pharr, for example, Barbara Hart, for example, some real tough numbers. Okay? It's not about that. It's about whether we look for group solutions as opposed to individual solutions. Whether we look just to make our living off the backs of battered women, or whether we live in that program, in those projects, with battered women. Whether we come to work with battered women or simply to help those poor dears, okay? Or to work, you know. With whether we think about having clients and caseloads, or whether we think about having residents and women like us that we sit down and work together with. That's the difference. It's whether we do group work, where you can have a battered woman be a facilitator, or whether you have to have one-on-one therapy because there's something wrong that needs to be cured, that needs to be changed in that individual woman. This is the issue. Therapy can be used. I mean, after a woman has gone through a long period of group work, whether she's had that opportunity to tell her story to other battered women and hear the other stories of battered women, she may have some individual issues that she wants to work on. I think that's wonderful. Let her go then and spend some time with someone who does that. If she wants to do that, that's fine. The other thing that came in of that was suddenly this notion that you had to credential battered women's workers. And that has set me back a long, long ways. The issue is not whether you have a degree or not. I don't care if everybody has a degree or everybody doesn't have a degree. I don't think that has relevance to our work. Period. If you have a degree, great. If you don't have a degree, great. Neither of those is relevant. What's relevant, that you have the experience of battering, of knowing about battering, and being able to work with equality with battered women. Period. So now don't go out of here saying Suzanne Pharr went on record of saying you're bad if you have a degree. You're just fine if you have a degree. Same way I feel about gay and lesbian and heterosexual issues. To be gay or lesbian or heterosexual, sexual identity is morally neutral. That ain't the issue. The issue is what you do with it. I'm sick of heterosexuals engaging in incest and rape, and I'm sick of gays and lesbians abusing one another. And I love the ones in both camps who don't. The sexuality issue is neutral. The degree issue is neutral. The experience issue is what counts. Okay? It's not only the sensitivity issue and the experience issue, it's how you come in with equality. Equality is a tough, tough issue. I think we've really run some danger about us and them. You know, there are those of us who work with battered women, and then they're the battered women. And I'll give you a judgment. I think that's wrong. I think it's just downright wrong. We are women with great commonality, and if we'll have any freedom, it'll be freedom for all of us. And I believe that. And I believe we're just barely beginning to make those steps toward it, and I think we've got to start taking bigger steps, braver steps. If I don't hurry, I won't get y'all out of here in time to take your next steps through your workshops. I'm going to go real fast now and try to get through this. The second thing that happens is pressure from institutions that said, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to credential. It came both from the inside, from women saying we've got to credential. It also came from institutions wanting us to credential. And what was that about? It was wanting to control our work. What is that credentialing about? So I will say to you, if you don't do it this way and by this time in such and such a manner, then I'm going to take your money away, or I'm going to take your something away from you. And that was really, really hard. And so the other thing that happened then from the inside, you had people who really wanted to be respectable. And boy, just about all of us have fallen prey to this one. We wanted kind of credibility in our communities. Well, you have to be careful about credibility. Now, some of us have set up the sorriest boards that you could ever ask for. And I mean sorry, pitiful. Pitiful, pitiful, pitiful of highly credible people in the community. We have picked some of the people who hate women more than anybody. And why did we do it? We said, why, they're so respected. There's a man in Arkansas whose name I won't call, but he owns the biggest chicken producing industry there, who's now a member of what they call the Good Suit Club, who makes all these big decisions about educational things there. One of the most violent human beings I've ever known. That's just the kind of people put on their boards and say, why, we had to put him on, he can raise money. Well, fine. So you got money and somebody who hates women, and you can't take a step to liberate anybody. You know, that's the problem we get into. You have to be really, really careful about this credibility issue. The other piece of that credibility issue is you're not going to make change, and you're not going to help anybody, women, unless you take risk. And when you take risk, you're going to disturb the social fabric. You have got to go against the status quo in order to end violence against women, because the status quo is to be violent against women. Does that make sense? If you're not being criticized, if your credibility and respectability is not being attacked, you are not doing good work. If somebody out there is not calling you a lesbian, if they are not calling you communist, if they're not calling you a bunch of bitches and whores, you are not doing good work in this society. And you just need to make up your mind. You say, I mean, it's about ethics. You say, all right, I won't make change. I'm scared of making change. I'll just go in there and say, here, dear, go to your room, and here, go to your therapist, and here, go out there and get yourself a job, and I won't make any change. But you have to be honest enough to say then that you're being complicit with violence against women. That's the ethical piece. Just go ahead and say it. Next time, if I ever get to come to Virginia again, I'm going to talk about boards. So, real fast then, what have we lost in that? We have some organizations that have lost their group work. They don't do groups in that same kind of analytical way where women do have that opportunity to raise consciousness. We don't have the organizing together. We have too much professionalism and loss of battered women's leadership. We have rules in our shelters just out the ear. I mean, we really have to look at our shelters and say, would I want to stay here? And if you wouldn't want to stay there, you need to be making some fast change about that. You know, we have to make change. I think we absolutely have to. Can we stand? Can we bear it in our hearts and in our souls to keep contributing to violence by not working against it? It's like, can we bear to keep contributing to racism by not working against it? Silence is contributing to it. You know, I mean, we've got to do that. Think of it this way. We have over 1,200 battered women's programs in this country, okay? Hundreds of thousands of battered women go through those programs every year. With that, we have an opportunity to move into our society hundreds of thousands of social change agents. If we worked with battered women as equals, if we worked with battered women in terms of analysis, in terms of telling those stories, in terms of coming to a political understanding of what's going on, there would be passing through our programs, not people that we've just helped, poor dears. I hate that attitude. But people that we have worked with to become strong. I entitled this speech a long time ago, before I wrote it, Revolution, Reform, or Transformation. And so I want to talk just a second about those. See, I think we have to make change, and those are sort of three places that we can choose to make them. One is the idea of reform. Now, I've always had a little bit of problem with reform because I can understand the arguments for it, but the reason I have a problem with it is it's so much about changing institutions just enough to make them bearable, you know, so they don't quite kill you. And you could, you know, so you get just enough food stamps that you can buy brown beans, you know, but not enough food stamps so you can buy lettuce. You know, it's that kind of thing. Reform is slow, and the other thing I have against reform is that it's not fundamental. You know, it doesn't go down to the root cause. So the other thing that you could go with revolution. So now, I've always thought revolution was real appealing, and I think the reason I found it so appealing is because I'm such an impatient person. And revolution is fast, you know, it just goes for the fundamental change, just jumps right on in there and does it. But you know, it's adversarial at the core. It's fast, it means overthrow, you know, and it goes right in for that fundamental change and that core change. But I wonder sometimes if it isn't a little bit scary, because with it, that overthrow requires violence, you know? And so revolution is another one that I sort of, I liked it a lot better in my youth when I didn't think beyond tomorrow. You know, I said, well, a bomb's going to kill me anyway. I don't care. Let's go in there and shoot them all down and throw them out. That was the 60s. Right now, I think I would promote transformation. And what I like about transformation is that it's slow. And this is, again, something I learned from civil rights workers. It's a long haul. But it's fundamental. With transformation, you've got to work with people and ourselves to make those changes that are so fundamental and so slow and so lasting and so about creating new institutions and new people and new selves out of that in the process, that we create a world that's livable for all of us. With transformation, I think we have to look at every step that we take has in it liberation, okay? So in each thing that we do in the Battered Women's Program, we have to examine that to say, does this hold within it liberation for me, liberation for my coworkers, liberation for battered women, liberation for volunteers, liberation for board? Does it have in it those pieces that make it liberating for everybody? That is to say, then we have to look at it and say, does a hierarchical structure work? Is that the most liberating structure that we can create? Transformation would be about taking a hierarchical structure and struggling with that until we transformed it into one that was truly liberating for everybody, step by step by step. When we make a decision in our shelters, in our programs, do we make that decision collectively? Or does it come from up here? And is that liberating? That's what empowerment is about. Empowerment and liberation are almost synonymous for me, because empowerment is a person having and gaining enough personal power that she can make decisions in that group so that she can have control over her life. And that is also what liberation is. That's it individually, and that's it collectively. So it's not so hard as a concept. What is hard is to break from the old systems and do it in that transforming kind of way. And if you don't believe transformation can work, look at yourselves. When I look at myself off a farm in Georgia, and I look at myself 49 years later, I have been through a transforming process. My life has been made absolutely different through transformation. And I believe that's possible for every human being. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a mountaintop experience that just suddenly, one day, it was like, you know, redneck conservatism be gone, progressive ideas come in. It happened over time and over making connections. So I think it takes great courage, and I think it takes really, really great determination. I think we have to look at, for social change, how do we support the liberation and empowerment of everybody who works and comes to our programs. And then the second piece of social change is, what do we have to do outside those doors to make that change happen, to bring that change about? And how are we going to take those risks? We have to say, is our program creating a new vision of what the world can be? Do I represent a new vision of what the world can be? I think we have some real tough work to do. I mean, I think we've got to learn to work together in ways that we have really been scared to work together. I think we have to build really strong coalitions, coalitions where we sit down and we grapple with difficult ideas, and we hold each other accountable to our best selves and to our best ideas. That we create our ideas in forums like this and in your state coalition as it meets, I guess, monthly or whenever it meets, and then hold programs and individuals accountable to those ideas that we create. I think we can do that. I think we have to do the other thing that our foremothers learned, that they learned that no woman would be free until every woman was free. Now that sounds simplistic, maybe, I don't know. I think it sounds very complex. I believe that with all my heart. I believe that we have to have task forces to remain vigilant and to support one another. I think we have to have women of color task forces, because women of color still, because of the blockage of us as white women, still are not provided that support and that place for full participation. What we do is that we block people's wholeness, their whole participation, and their place where they can be whole within themselves. We do it with battered women, and then we do it with other kinds of oppressed groups. We've learned that so clearly. We've learned that we can't say they're acceptable and unacceptable women. We can't say that because you're middle class, then you're acceptable if you dress a certain way or live a certain lifestyle. And that if you're poor, you're not, you're them. You're among the smell bads and the do-wrongs. You can't say because someone's heterosexual or appears to be heterosexual that she's good, and that someone who's lesbian is bad. Someone who is old and no longer able to work is to be discarded, and someone who is young gets all the force of society's attention. There is no liberation in that. I believe that if we do not walk forward together, hand in hand, this way, not a few up here, not the pyramid shape, where a few walk to liberation, then a few more and a few more, but this wide shape where we cover a lot of ground slowly. I think if we don't move forward in that way, we won't move forward. I think the violence will just keep on and keep on and keep on until it's hard for us to keep on keeping on. I think we've got to. I think what we have here in this room, I think we are for liberation here. I think we are for freedom. I think we are for wholeness. I think we must work together to transform this world so that all of us can live, truly live in wholeness within this world. Thank you very much.